Okay. Call to order. Let's establish a quorum.
Mary Ellen Early.
Here.
Rebecca Franzoya.
Here.
President Wolfie.
Here.
Michael Hardeman.
I'm here.
Sam Kabushian. Carter Guzman.
Here.
Shirley Bose.
Here.
And Dr. Lewis was here but left, not feeling well.
Okay. Well, at the beginning of this board meeting, I have this comment to make that public comment will be allowed on agenda items as those items are taken up by the board during the meeting. Under the Open Meetings Act, the board may not take action on items raised by public comment that are not on the agenda, other than to decide whether or not to schedule that item for a future meeting. If you would like to provide a comment, it would be appreciated, though not required, if you would come forward and let us know your name and, if applicable, the organization you're representing. In order to allow the board sufficient time to conduct its scheduled business, public comment may be limited. If you are not recognized, please be sure to raise your hand to get noticed, because we want to make sure we get all your comments. Are there any public comments at this time? Seeing none, let's go ahead with the first order of business, which is the approval of minutes.
Sorry.
Anybody make a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Hearing any discussion? Call the question. All that's in favor of approving the minutes, just say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion, any nays? No? Okay, then unanimous, the minutes are passed. Next item on the agenda is the Executive Officer's Report.
Okay, so we have an update on a few items here. We have an update on a few items here, and we'll start with item 3A. Inside your packets is the new pamphlet that we have for the licensure and application process. This was part of our strategic plan to educate students pursuing RCP licensure about the consequences of having convictions and violations of the RCPA. So this goes a long way to support that objective. And we are in the process of reproduction and distribution to all the education programs throughout the state. Are there any questions? Okay, moving on to 3B. Office of the Attorney General Budget Change Proposal. We were notified this summer that the AG had increased their service fees. Attorney services are going up from $170 to $220 per hour. That's a 30% increase. Paralegal services, to which in the past we have relied upon heavily, those are increasing 70% from $120 to $205 per hour. However, after reviewing our past experience with the budget and past expenditures and the history over a couple of decades on how this works, we determined not to pursue BCP at this time. Budget change proposal, which would increase our amount of spending in that area. We are hoping that we will be able to contain the cost into our existing budget. There are avenues you can take if you exceed that, but we, again, are hoping to stay within the budget and have no plans at this time to increase the budget for that. And should we do something like that, it would obviously go through the executive committee. Are there any questions on that? Okay. Item 3C, detailed disciplinary action summaries. This is a result of a recommendation that came through our last sunset review. They had asked years and a couple of decades ago, we had started printing a quarterly list of everybody that was disciplined. And this is all the disciplinary actions taken in this time frame, and it gave a little, very short summary of what the cause was. Well, we stopped doing that when Breeze was introduced. And so right now you can go to Breeze and look up any particular person, but you can't just go see what actions were taken by the board. And Sunset had asked that we reinstate that. And so we had included that in our last strategic plan to do that, and we have now done that. What you're looking at is a sample. It is online now, and the data does go back to 2016. So there's quarterly data back to 2016.
Very nice.
Yeah. And that is, thank you very much to one of our staff members, Katie, and our enforcement manager, Leanne, who really took that on. Okay, and the last item, 3D, is the Medicare's patient-driven payment model, skilled nursing reimbursement. So it's come to our attention that skilled nursing facilities, there's a new reimbursement model for this, and some of the skilled nursing facilities aren't even that familiar with it yet. And I went ahead and reached out to Anne Marie Hummel at AARC to get more information about what this was, because it's really hard to get a clean understanding of reimbursement. But she was very good. She's been following legislation for the AARC, so she knew exactly what was going on. So the very high summary of it is that effective last October 1st, just the past, there's a new reimbursement model. It used to be that people in subacute care and all skilled nursing facilities were reimbursed based on nursing and therapy, but not respiratory therapy, things like occupational therapy. And that was how reimbursement was done. The nursing hours, the volume of services, rather than the condition of the patients at the time they're admitted. That's all changed now, and it's now going by the acuity of the patient, and they've included a category of non-ancillary services, which include respiratory care services. There are several items that are now identified as respiratory care tasks that get a certain amount of points that makes the reimbursement more. The reimbursement does not specify that you have to use a respiratory therapist for those services. However, what we're hoping is that it provides an incentive now for these, especially subacutes, but all skilled nursing facilities, to use the care and the provider and give patients the care that they need and deserve. So hopefully we will start seeing more respiratory therapists providing services rather than other service providers who really are not as qualified or qualified at all to provide the service. And that's, hopefully we can get that word out there that there is new reimbursement for SNFs, so they can start taking advantage of that in a good way. And that concludes the report. Are there any other questions?
I have a question. So how do we get the word out?
How do we get the word out? That is a good question. We do have all the mailing addresses of all the, skilled nursing facilities, so we could certainly send something. It's just that we're not really the expert in this area. Let me reach out. Let me find out how they are getting notified of it in the first place and see what we can do to help.
Okay. Thanks for the report. Yeah, I'd be very interested in if we could intervene some way or another and make them more aware. Okay. Well, Stephanie and Christine, could you give us an update on item number 4 on the Board of Vocational Nursing and Psych Tech meetings and where we stand in that process? Seems to be shifting grounds.
We are shifting ground. I hope that you've had a chance to review item 4, the cover. So the history of this is that we began a 1.5 years ago meeting. We had attorneys there. We had board presidents there and some board members, maybe one more board member from either side, staff, as well as agency, representatives from our agency and our department. for a year and a half. So for about 9 of those months, we met several times. We came together and drafted a joint statement that both of us agreed, supported 100%. That draft statement is still posted on our website and the BVMPT's website. In April 2019, that was published. Shortly after that, there was some pushback by some associations. And as a matter of, because the joint statement was really supposed to be interpreting existing law, there should have been no cause for regulations, but because there was so much pushback, the department asked if we would go ahead, both boards would go ahead and develop and draft regulations to make sure that people had an opportunity for public input. In June, we did try to do that. We put it here. We had a lot of testimony. The fact that we didn't pass the regulations did not change the law. It's still illegal for LVNs to practice respiratory care if it's beyond manual and technical skills. However, we decided not to pass those regulations because it would have been insensitive. These people had come, and I felt like if we had passed them, and I think you did too, that's why you didn't pass it, that we were ignoring them. So what the board asked to do is make a motion to change the joint statement to exclude home care at this point. It still didn't change the law, but it changed the joint statement to just kind of show that this is our focus right here. And so we did that. The private post-secondary, when we agreed to do regulations, we both agreed to do them. Private post-secondary has not yet presented regulations, but instead they've presented legislation. And it was without, when I became aware that they have changed paths was about 3 weeks ago. They actually changed paths in April, but I did not know that for certain. I had suspected it, but it was not forthcoming until 3 weeks ago. So now they have legislation, and then that is an item B. And the legislation essentially says that you can take a course, such as this continuing education course, and if an LVN does that, they can practice medicine. So this is what they're proposing. It's not in a bill. They do not have an author. They are asking for public comment. But the people they're asking for public comment from are the people who are providing these services already. And most of them are home care, most of them are adult day health care. However, the legislation they presented does not narrow it to those fields. They have left it wide open so that an LVN takes this course and they provide med care anywhere. My argument has always been that home care is a little bit of a different animal, maybe even the daycare facilities, mainly because people understand there's more risk involved when you're caring for somebody at home. It's a different type of level of care. Your expectation is lower. And therefore, and the thing is they really want their person at home, whether it be because they just want them near them or they want them to be able to go out and do different activities that they would not be able to do if they were in a facility. And so I have gotten comments that they would rather take that risk and have the person at home. Again, though, this legislation doesn't limit it to just home or any other area. So this is before you, really just as information, because at this point, like I said, there's no bill, there's nothing there. We're watching it. I am on the advisory committee, which I will be having staff go to find out what is happening and where they're headed on this. I don't know if they will change course again or not. And right now, their next advisory meeting will be November 17th, I believe it is. 7th, November 7th. So that's it. Does anyone have any questions, comments?
Thank you for being on top of it. It's almost a quicksand, though.
Well, thank you for coming to the meetings and being present as well.
Yeah, well, it's, but you've done you and Christine have done an exceptional job of trying to keep things at a medium boil, especially with the amount of public involvement. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's no current action that we need to take right now.
There really isn't. It'd be great if anybody has comments to kind of get a feel for, if the board has something they can state publicly at this point.
Mr. Chairman, I am very interested to hear that our own executive officer was not aware of this until 3 weeks ago, because I have to tell you, I was quite surprised to read the proposed legislation. And I thought when we met in June at the various locations that it was for the purpose of making exceptions for LVNs to provide home care and maybe lower level things like walking children to school. And I was not prepared for the way the legislation was written, which would essentially give them the ability, if they had that extra certification. So I was really taken aback.
Thank you. One of the things I seem to have noticed throughout all the meetings is that sometimes I think there's just a gap in the communication. We're talking at a higher level of respiratory care, and they're talking at a basic level. Sometimes that happens. And so when they say that LVNs are educated, they are talking about one course that's an overview course that includes respiratory care. I don't think they're getting the concept that vent care is one of the main things that respiratory therapists do and are taught. They have over 2 years of experience and clinical experience, are competency tested in this, have to provide continuation, have to be licensed to do this. And it's amazing to me that I'm not sure that they understand their overview course is nowhere close to what it takes to be really good and safe at providing this care.
Not only that, but,
Sorry.
not only that, but when a respiratory therapist graduates from a program and gets hired, even though they've had this training for, extensive training in their education, most hospitals don't even put them in the ICU for like 6 months to a year because they know they're not prepared to function alone. So there's definitely a disconnect there.
Yes.
This is just a comment I want to make because I read the proposed legislation, and it sounds like the LVNs that are pursuing that, they would have to go through a process of getting a modified licensure. So I just want to make a comment that obviously is going to cost more to go through that process, and that cost obviously will be passed on to the taxpayers. When we already have RTs who have an established process of going through extensive training, education, and licensure process, and are, ready and be able to give a care at a proper level. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Do we have anybody else on the board?
One more thing, kind of tagging on what Charlene said, is that if there is any kind of a training course that's to be provided or certification for respiratory therapists, if we want to move forward for what we originally said for home care and maybe taking someone to school, that should be controlled by this board. These are the experts here in respiratory care. These are the ones with the history to the experts out in the field. And it doesn't make sense to have LVNs setting the training materials or overseeing it and enforcing it. And that would be my last comment.
With the legislation from last year, it's very important that we do control and set up the course content and administer the courses, because it's not only going to occur with LVNs, it's also occurring with EMTs, and since we are here in many ways to protect the public and to protect the patients, it's very important that for the skill sets that they need to effectively do their jobs, that we train them. And that might be the next step within Department of Consumer Affairs, just realizing that there's resident groups of experts that can collaborate and cause that evolution to occur in a safe manner without a duplication of services. Okay, anybody else on the board have a comment? I believe we have some comment from the public.
Good morning. Braden Obrowski on behalf of the California Association of Health Services at Home. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak. The issues with home care, and really it's home health, right? Home care is more like an IHSS program where you're giving care with bathing, cooking, stuff like that. We're talking about home health services, which is nursing services in the home. A lot of these LVNs that are performing these services are providing 12 and 24-hour care, right? So it's not like you're just going in doing an hour of RT services and leaving. Yes, an RT can do that. We're providing care for a long period of time. Okay, that's sanctioned by the Medi-Cal program. The Medi-Cal program only pays LVNs to do this. There's no other payment mechanism for that. So that's been the case. Department of Department of Public Health, which authorizes the home health agencies. They say that LVNs do these services. This is what the state general fund is funded for LVNs to do this service, okay? It's been like that for long. We are not trying to take away anything from RTs, fully respect RTs. We're not trying to infringe on anybody's roles or anything like that. It's a service of care that needs extended hours. We follow these kids to school, we follow them home, we let them do other activities, and we're there doing that plus everything else. In a setting where you can have a physical therapist come in, an RT come in, and so on and so forth, it works fine. In a home setting, you have these LVNs doing multiple services on a 12 and 24-hour period. It's just a completely different animal. So our point has always been there needs to be some wiggle room here to work with this because one, it's the care, the hours needed are very different. Two, it's how the state general fund has been funded and built. Three, we have oversight from the Department of Public Health that is looking at these cases and authorizing these cases. And that's just what we're looking to kind of find that middle ground with. So unless there's any questions, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
My name is Matt Diaz. I'm with Maxim Healthcare. We're a home health provider. And just to add on top of the previous gentleman's comments, we take great care and take it very seriously, the training that goes into the LVNs that are providing service. And it is very extensive training on the various home mechanical ventilators that are utilized for these patients to remain in the community. So I do take issue with the executive director's comment as far as there being a lower expectation of care. These are very medically fragile children and adults that need these services to remain in the community. And has the board thought of, hey, if you were to remove the ability of LVNs to provide this care in the community setting, what that would do to the healthcare delivery system? You would have thousands of patients that would enter into the facility setting, not being able to stay in the community because, quite frankly, I doubt there's that many RTs that are going to come into play when there's not a funding mechanism available to do this hourly care in the community with these patients one-on-one, and how that would impact the fact that there are not facilities available to house these patients throughout the state. It is a serious issue that if you were to go forward with this and not allow LVNs to continue to this who are highly trained in this type of care and that we are highly effective in providing this type of care to individuals that require mechanical ventilation for life sustainment, you would impact the delivery system, the taxpayer dollars that you mentioned as well, and the amount it would cost the taxpayers if these individuals went and were institutionalized versus being in the community setting. So I think the board needs to think very hard and very seriously about the impact that your actions could have on these individuals and potentially carving out LVN's abilities in the future to provide this type of care to home mechanical ventilator patients.
I don't think that I was very clear. I just need to clear this up. We are actually on your side.
It didn't come across that way, though.
Okay, so let me try to make it clear. Existing law today does not allow LVNs to provide the services that are being provided in home care. That is existing law. We are talking about perhaps setting up a program to allow it because of the very argument you just made.
Having worked,
But I also want to add, I'm sorry, but I also want to add that home care has never been on our radar. There have been 5 deaths by LVNs for providing home care that did not know what to do. So it's not that we are on your side. We want this to happen because I don't think there's enough providers to allow it to happen, and it would be awkward to have 5 different people coming into a home to provide care like you were saying. So please don't misunderstand. We are saying the same thing. Today, it is illegal. We're trying to look at maybe not making it illegal.
I've been in home care for 17 plus years, and LVNs have provided this care during my entirety, of experience in the skilled home health arena. So,
And I think that's why there's confusion, honestly, is because it's happened so long. So we're trying to get the law congruent with that part of care.
It's last of the Wild West in many cases. Having been in home care myself, I've helped train different LVNs at different nursing agencies as to the alarms, the changing of ventilator circuits.
correct.
When it's appropriate when to use a backup ventilator. You guys provide a very essential service, and there is no intent to limit that. The intent really is to make it legal and to make sure that the content is consistent.
Correct.
Because right now you have various nursing agencies that do self-certification. You have different DME providers that are brought in by these nursing agencies. And that, we're very sympathetic, and I realize that getting the system to change, it would be horrendous on the patients. So that's, we'll work through it, and I think the patients will be a lot better for it. So
We appreciate that, and thank you for the clarification. I very much appreciate it.
Great. Thank you very much.
one other fact is that American medicine pretty much has been evolved into, in the hospitals and throughout the system of a check and cross-check. And that's very important, that triangular balance that's been developed in the last 50 years within American healthcare be maintained in the home care setting.
Yeah. No, thank you for that comment. And we want, what I think everybody wants is to make sure these individuals remain safe in the community and get the proper care. And this is the best mechanism that we know in order to make that actually happen. So we appreciate the clarification. And as a provider, and I know I can speak just for Maxim as a representative, of us as a specific provider, we're happy to answer any questions, give any feedback.
I was just going to say, make sure that you sign in, or if you have a card to give
yes,
me,
I did. Yeah,
I'll then include
absolutely.
you.
Will do. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your concerns and comments. Anyone else care to make a comment? Okay. Moving on. Well, we've got the update. Have we reviewed the proposed draft legislation, and is there any comments on that? I think we pretty much covered the subject, but anybody on the board have any further questions?
I guess I have a point of clarification. So I know that we initially, when we were working with the nursing board, the LVN board, initially we were trying to provide exactly what this gentleman is asking for, right? But the new proposal goes beyond that. Am I right? So it's not just for home care.
It's significantly gone beyond.
And we definitely oppose that.
That is correct. Their proposal not only goes beyond home care, it goes anywhere. It also doesn't limit any of the scope of practice at all. So, that would be, they probably would come back with stating that they're going to put that in regulation. But once a law is there like that, it's open season. They could make any scope of practice, any task able for the LVNs to do under any education requirements they develop through regulation.
So I guess my question is, because I'm not familiar with the process, can can this board publicly oppose, is there a mechanism for this board to oppose this to move forward?
I don't know, can we do that without a bill? Can we go ahead and oppose it? I mean, that's actually interesting, because usually we let our exec committee, we do have something in there where they're able to take opposed positions on bills. But given the bigness of this language, perhaps we can take a position that if any such bill comes out, that you're okay with an opposed position. Is that okay, Jason?
I think it's okay. I mean, given that you're really at the preliminary stages, I mean, there's no author, this is just kind of a proposal. I think probably at the next board meeting, the board can assess kind of what the statutory language will be. I mean, you never know what the final languages will be. There's tons of amendments that take place, so, you know, eventually, depending on what the statutory language provides for in their Practice Act, the board may take a position of support. It just kind of depends on what the bill, you know, looks like, so.
I guess I just want to make sure that we uphold our mandate to protect the consumer,
Sure.
and that we're not just waiting to see what happens,
Yeah.
if there's something that we could do.
I would also be mindful of the sensitivity that, you know, two boards are kind of, have competing interests, and so just, I'm not saying the board does not have the authority to kind of oppose potential legislation. It's just something to keep in mind when choosing whether to support or oppose a particular bill.
Okay. Shirley?
I have a comment or a kind of like a question about that. So my understanding is when a legislation is proposed or is written and, you know, there's a bill, while going through the process, when it's going through the Appropriations Committee, isn't there a step where they look at that bill and see if it's contradicting any existing laws? And looking at that proposed legislation that I read, it looks like it's contradicting what we already have right now, where it says that the Respiratory Care Board would be the sole entity to determine those cares. So what?
Yeah, it doesn't really contradict our existing laws, it's just giving them more authority. So there's several stages in getting the bill, so you have to get an author, and that can be thwarted as well just by, you know, communications with people. If they are successful in getting an author, then you are able to communicate before any committees, hearings. And that one would probably go through both what?
BMP and health.
Yeah, probably B&P and Health and Appropriations. And so there's lots of opportunity, but I understand what Ricardo's saying in that if anybody wants to make a motion, just to simply say for the record that we object to this language as presented, that I think that's perfectly appropriate. And of course, we're going to come back with actual legislation and it would be different, I'm sure.
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
Roll call.
Is there any further discussion?
Uh,
I have a question. I just want to clarify that this isn't just for the home care LVNs. This is all LVNs. Is that correct? In working in the hospitals, working on
Correct.
equipment
Yes, it
that
is.
they may not have in the home care facilities, that type of thing, correct?
Correct.
Also, I've looked at the timeline that they have provided, which says July of '23. That seems like an awfully long time.
Oh, I think it's pretty ambitious. That's a pretty good timeline, because, you know, you have to get your legislation first, and you can start working on regs, but you can't really pursue them too much until you know that legislation's going to be signed. And the regulation process is very long. It's a 9 to 12-month process easily.
Before they start with the language of the bill.
That would be, they would start with legislation and then do regs, and then it would become effective. So,
It just, you have 2-year bills. So according to this, it would take 2 years before they provided legislation.
Oh, I think they're saying the legislation would be approved this year in 2020, so it would go in effect next January 2021,
Oh, really?
a year and a month or so. And in the meantime, they'll be working on regulations to go into effect July of 23. So they'll wait till the legislation is enacted in 21, and then they're going to pull together regulations. And they're giving themselves plenty of time to make sure the regulations go into effect. Because the regulation process has been taking at least 9 to 12 months. Sometimes it can go 18. And I think they know that theirs will be bumpy. So, I'm not sure why the timeline, but I think it's a reasonable timeline.
Okay, thank you.
Sometimes when we take a position on legislation, we take opposed unless amended. I'm wondering if that would be a friendly amendment to this proposal.
Is it possible to restate my motion?
Sure.
So the motion is that we will support legislation that specifically deals with home care in regards to LVNs. But we do not support this legislation as it stands, open-ended.
And you're okay with them doing the training for that?
No, including that we, RTs or pulmonologists will provide the training.
There would be no reason for the legislation then.
Exactly.
So I'm not sure that oppose unless amended works here.
Okay.
But I get, that is a more friendly way to do something. I think we just need to go on record that we don't support this
Okay. We'll leave it.
in its entirety.
Okay, so there's a motion on the floor to not support their legislation and to oppose it.
Is there a second?
Yeah, I second.
Okay, second.
Okay,
Is there any public comment?
okay. Thanks for asking that. Call for the question. Want to get a
I don't have.
tally on?
Ready? Okay. Mary Ellen Early? Rebecca?
Aye.
Linda Goldstein?
Aye.
Michael Hardeman?
Aye.
Sam Kabusha?
Aye.
Ricardo Guzman?
Aye.
Shirley Bowes?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. That's a developing situation. Thanks. It's good that everybody supports not supporting it. Okay, next is budget item. Oh, after that, I'm sorry. Any public comment on, before we move to next budget item, or number 5? Okay, let's go to the budget.
Okay, I don't know if you've had an opportunity to review the fiscal report that we provide generally at the last meeting of each year. We have come up essentially with what we could, absent regular reports, which I believe Taylor, who is in the audience and will be speaking next, will touch upon a little bit more in detail. But overall, our current fund condition appears to be stable due to the recent fee increases. We continue to underspend our budget, although we do project slight increases in expenditures. Essentially, there are always variables that come into play. Some of them are even unforeseen, like when we don't have the reports and things to rely upon regularly now. Some of these examples would be things such as employee compensation, retirement contributions, or items such as the AG increase that Stephanie mentioned earlier that was kind of sprung upon us pretty last minute. So as such, we continue to monitor things really closely to identify potential areas of concern. I don't know if you have any specific questions, but I was just going to point out a few things that, number one being you might notice on the fund condition, the supplemental pension payout toward the bottom. Just wanted to give a little bit of information. appears that, in doing some research, that there was a loan made by the general fund or surplus to the employee retirement, and essentially these amounts represent what each, or our particular board, because each state agency had to pay back for that loan along with interest and so forth. And so this represents the portion that our board will be paying back, estimated to be $470,000 through 24-25 fiscal year. The only other thing we wanted to bring to your attention was that breeze costs, while we don't, right now the department's in the process of doing a budget change proposal, and we don't necessarily have exact figures on what ongoing breeze maintenance costs will be. Some of you that were around during the implementation will recall that it tended to be a little more expensive than we originally projected. But we have been assured that the amounts are similar to what has been provided to us in the past. So we feel pretty confident in projecting what those ongoing maintenance costs will be. And then the only other thing to bring to your attention, as I mentioned earlier, employee compensation, retirement contributions, those types of things, as they increase, it kind of hits us threefold because it affects us from our staff perspective, but also in things such as statewide pro rata, departmental pro rata, because as employee compensation goes up, the department has to pay its employees more, obviously, as well as the state from a central statewide perspective. So we like to hear about raises from a personal perspective, but when you're watching your budget, we definitely keep a close eye on that. So I don't know if there's any other specific questions.
Shirlene?
I just have a quick question regarding the one item, Division of Investigation. I see that for the fiscal year 2018-19, there was a $0 expenditure, and then we're also obviously projecting the same. Is that division of is that related to the disciplinary action items? And if so, why are we not?
I will tell you that a majority of our investigations are conducted in-house. We have non-sworn special investigators that are able to conduct the majority of our investigations. Division of Investigation, I will be honest, I have overseen the budget for 15 to 20 years, and they have a very different budgeting method. Again, Taylor, I don't want to put you on the spot, but they do kind of a 2 or 3 year rollover where essentially you're paying for cases that they investigated for you a few years prior. They're coming up with somewhat of an average. Okay. And because we use them so infrequently, it's not uncommon to see 0 because we may have only had 1 or 2 cases with them.
Okay.
Thank you for the clarification.
Good morning. My name is Taylor Schick. I'm the fiscal officer for the Department of Consumer Affairs. To follow up on that Division of Investigation question, it is handled a lot like statewide pro rata, where there's something called a 2-year roll forward. So we're always budgeting a program in advance for anticipated workload. And so for the Division of Investigation, we don't ever want to hamper a program by going, you don't have the authority to pay for them this year. We go ahead, let DFI do those hours of work. And then when we're building the next year's budget, we'll incorporate those hours and build it into the budget. And then we take a look at that and go, okay, well, did we spend what we budgeted? And then we determine whether or not a credit is owed or there's a debit more is owed to the for the Division of Investigations work. And then that's how it'll roll forward. So we're always trying to play a little bit of catch up to make sure we've assessed the true cost to a program. So a program that has their own sort of internal investigations may use the peace officer role a little bit more infrequently. You'll see sometimes you'll have a budget there, and then the next couple of years there won't be a budget until additional workload has come on where we have to actually build in additional costs to reimburse DFI for those costs that they incurred years prior.
So it's like a rollover.
Yes.
Kind of thing. Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, I can hand it on over to Taylor unless you have other questions on the actual report.
Is there anyone? Any other questions on the board? Okay.
Then I'll go ahead and tackle item B, and that's the update on the fiscal system for the department. I did prepare a short handout which bullet pointed a high-level summary of the project, but just so everyone is aware, Fiscal is the new statewide system for not only accounting, but also budgeting and procurement and contracting. So it incorporates previously what were in very numerous IT little solutions for each of those areas. It's incorporating all of those into one. It is still in the build-up time, so there are a couple key departments that are not yet on or fully integrated into Fiscal yet. Most importantly of note would be the State Controller's Office. So right now, there's a little bit of a discrepancy where State Controller's Office is still the official book of record for the state of California, but they're not on Fiscal. But the majority of all the departments within California are on Fiscal. So there's a reconciliation that needs to happen between those two systems. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in some of the issues that DCA has been facing, working towards to get fully integrated onto the system. So DCA did go live, at least on the accounting perspective, in July of 2017. And we went live full bore. So we did not rely on CalSTARS anymore. We did a cutoff. We could not use CalSTARS anymore. CalSTARS was a system we had been using for the last 30 years. It was very mature. We knew what to expect from it and knew how to work within it. That's not the same with Fiscal. We're learning on the fly in a lot of cases. While there was training leading up to it, a lot of it was sort of insufficient to deal with the nature of the Department of Consumer Affairs. One of the ways I look at the Department of Consumer Affairs, it's a very horizontal structure. We do have an administrative structure, but we have about 37 boards and bureaus that are all semi-autonomous, and about 74 different funds that we have to monitor and reconcile on an annual basis. So that's in terms of true just volume of workload, we might not be very complex, but we have a volume that is very cumbersome. And in Fiscal, which now is every transaction is one-to-one versus CalSTARS where you could batch multiple transactions into one, it's a lot more work. Some of the struggles that we initially faced were with the conversion from CalSTARS, a lot of what we would call a purchase order or contract, converting those if they were multi-year from the old CalSTARS system to Fiscal, so we had errors there. The issue with the conversion ultimately resulted in a situation where DCA was just behind, and we've been playing catch up. And that's the most important thing I think to take away, is that we've been playing catch up for the last 2 years and trying to get current on the system. And a lot of the issues with the reporting and having really well-rounded reports that include all the information is being current on the system. As I mentioned, it's probably the third paragraph down, the Fiscal system is very linear. There's a lot of little crossroads or checkboxes that you have to hit before you can go on to the next activity. So while we're able to enact in the system, say in 2018-19, we can't actually finish any automated processes like allocations until the prior fiscal year is actually closed. So all through 2018-19, which we've already essentially passed that, we have not been able to run an allocation because 17-18 had not been closed until just this last September. So we were already a full year behind in closing 2017-18. We did close that in September, and we actually are able to fast track because my staff, are already on top of every action that's occurred in 18-19, and they were able to do almost an allocation every 2 days or so. So we've already done our allocations in 18-19 through, I believe, period 12, so almost the entire way through the fiscal year. The one thing that's holding us up from actually closing 18-19 now is actually doing the reconciliations, making sure that our book of record matches with SCO, because again, SCO is not on Fiscal yet. They're coming on in waves and various functionality. We are anticipating having that reconciliation done by the end of the year so we can close 18-19, and then we can start hitting and running our allocations in 19-20. And my goal is to be completely caught up in current in 19-20 by March of 2020. So in about 5 months, I want to be fully caught up in the system. And that's very important because once we're fully caught up, we can actually use some of the automated reports. They're a little clunky out of the system, but we can use those automated reports and they will have the full actual picture of what the board's expenditures are. Right now, if I ran an automated report out of Fiscal, it's going to include the majority of the expenditures to date, but it will not include anything for allocated postage, allocated printing costs, and one of the main things that we allocate as a department is our departmental pro rata, so it won't include any of our pro rata costs, which for a lot of programs is roughly about 20% of their budget. So that's one of the things that those reports are lacking. So in lieu of using those reports, your board staff have been working with my staff, and they've been basically pulling out, point in time we call them extracts, and it's just every transaction that's in the system. It's a huge document, and then we filter it down to only those items that are tied to the Respiratory Care Board, and then we run projections based on it. But that extract document isn't something that's user-friendly or can just be printed out as a report. So that's one of the things that we're really lacking on, and I do appreciate the patience of all our boards and bureaus, because right now, and I get it, it's like you're operating in a fog, because you haven't seen a budget report like we had in CalSTARS for roughly 2 years now. And we acknowledge that difficulty. So one of the things that we are working on to sort of try to bridge that gap is we're working with our Office of Information Services. They have a system called Cognos, which is pretty interactive data manipulation type software. We're working with them right now. So we've already identified all the key reports and documents out of Fiscal that we need to import into that. And now we're just working on, okay, so how can we take that information and roll it up and put it into a report format that'll make sense, that'll be easy to use and understand for our board members and also our boards as well. We are hoping to roll that out in all reports, I believe effective January. We have our baseline information in there right now. It's just about working with the team to manipulate and make sure those reports are showing, items appropriately, correctly, and in category, I'll use the term category codes that make sense. Like, one of the things I'll just make note here, in Fiscal versus CalSTARS. CalSTARS, like your Attorney General costs, used to be isolated into its own code under an enforcement line item. Now, Attorney General costs are isolated under a consulting and professional service interdepartmental. We rarely think of it as an interdepartmental because there's no real contract between us and the Attorney General's office, but that's where it's housed. That's one of those items where, even though it's housed there in the structure, I would like to pull it out and build it under its own little enforcement line item, much like Division of Investigation, so programs can see like items lumped and then sum totaled in under like an enforcement line item. So that's one of the things we're working with our Office of Information Services using this Cognos tool to try to develop sort of catered reports to meet the needs of our program. So we're hoping to roll that out by January, and then again by March be fully current in the system. So then even I can use automated reports that'll have full disclosure of all the costs that have hit the program.
Sounds like a lot of work.
It is a lot of work, and it's a lot of challenges. Like I say, SCO, State Controller's Office, is going on in phases, so chunks of their functionality will come online, and every time that happens, it changes some of our workflow process, and my staff have to learn something new, or things that were working are now broken, and we have to figure out how to get them working again. So my staff are working, most of them are here 7 days a week to try to get caught up. Right now, the big push is to get 18-19 financial year end estimates completed, because one of the things we also acknowledge is one of the tools that both the board utilizes to monitor your fund's health and condition, and also our control agencies, Department of Finance specifically, is your fund condition. And all of the fund conditions right now that are displayed in the governor's budget or even in your programs are using estimates versus actuals. So our hard push right now is to have 17-18 year-end financials done and those 18-19 year-end financials done. I think our goal was October 30th. We have about 50 of our 74 funds completed. So we're a little bit behind there, but we are moving forward and hope within the next couple of weeks to have all funds completed with a 18-19 year-end financial estimate done. And then we can provide programs with updated fund conditions that show a truer picture of where you are on your fund.
Thank you. We look forward to the appropriate numbers.
I believe everyone is, so we are working towards that.
Taylor, I just wanted to ask, on those reports that are coming out in January, you had said earlier that like the DCA pro rata wasn't included in them. Will it be included in those reports?
On the reports we're working out of Cognos, they will be included.
Excellent.
The departmental pro rata won't show up in the automated reports until we're fully current on the system.
Okay.
And that's because of that automated allocation process. Since we allocate those costs as part of the monthly reconciliation within Fiscal, until we're fully current in the system, none of the automated reports out of Fiscal will include departmental pro rata, at least not timely until we're current on the system. But we'll be able to, because we know what our expenditures are, we'll be able to plug them in to sort of the curated report that we're working with the Office of Information Services to create. So it'll be on those reports.
Excellent. And can I just say to my board members, thank you very much for coming. Thank you for a great presentation, and thank you for all the work you do for the Budget Office. I've seen your work for many, many years, and you are exemplary employee and leader. Thank you so much.
I appreciate the comments. And we'll continue to work forward to, give you the best product going forward and try to get you numbers that you can rely upon.
Thank you.
Questions?
President, just like to comment, Mr. President, thanks for your brevity on a very complicated, and for one page, I know that was hard to do. Thank you. Off? How did they get off? Okay. I thought it was hard. Anyways, thanks for your brevity and for the short report. Those are always nice to not have pages and pages of, you could have probably had 20 pages and
Yeah.
want more, right? So thank you.
I could have gone into the weeds a lot more with the, accounting jargon, which will fly over sometimes even my head, but yes.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Any comment from the public?
All right, no comments from the public. Let's
Thank you.
move forward with the annual licensing and enforcement statistics. Is that Christine? No?
This is the information that we are required to submit to the department on an annual basis. We simply decided to include it and share it to give you an idea, a snapshot, if you will, of the enforcement, licensing numbers and so forth. So I don't think that there was anything that stood out as being too different than what is, pretty standard reported. But if anyone has any specific questions.
Anyone on the board have any questions?
Just want to clarify, thank you. The 23,490, that's active license?
It is active or renewable.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Any comments from the, or observations from the public? Okay, moving on.
Okay, item 7A is just an update on legislation of interest. The first year of the two-year legislative cycle came to a closed session, ended the end of September. So this is just an update. I'll kind of go over bills where, there are quite a few of them that actually have become two-year bills, and so those ones, I don't know that there's as many questions as, I'll give an update on those where action has been taken or if the board expressed support, opposition, et cetera. The HR 2508, which is the federal legislation, I am not specifically familiar with how that works, but I will tell you nothing has changed. I have watched it, and it's been introduced, and that is where things stand as of now. So we did issue a letter of support on behalf of the board, Mark signed, and we will continue to monitor that and then provide any updates as we see those. The next item I wanted to bring to your attention was AB 241, which was signed by the governor. It is titled Implicit Bias and requires continuing education requirements for certain boards, not particularly our board. I just thought you might find that interesting because some of the other healthcare professions are being required to take this specified training. The next item, which was a bill, AB 476, that was actually vetoed by the governor, would have required Department of Consumer Affairs to create a task force that was specific to foreign-trained professionals. Again, that bill was vetoed, so, and we were just watching that. Signed by the governor, that was also a watch position, was AB 496. This was the non-healing arts omnibus bill for consumer affairs, but of specific interest in that particular bill was that it gives the board member, a board member's appointing authority, power to remove the board member for specified reasons. I mean, they're pretty standard. It's incompetence, it's negligence, dishonest act, things along those lines. And The other bill, the SB 53, which we did have and oppose unless amended, and we also sent a letter to that author, it has become a 2-year bill, and it is dead for 2019, so we will continue to watch that in the upcoming 2020 legislative year. Unless there's any other questions, those were pretty much the highlights.
Any questions from the board? Any questions or comments from the public? Okay, moving on. Let's see, 7A, I believe? No, I'm sorry, 7B.
I have been doing the same thing for 2 weeks, Mark.
That part?
Splitting that item up on 2 different pages kept throwing me. All right. I cannot find my notes on this, but I think we're okay. You may recall back in March, the board had approved pursuing legislation for adding registries and people who resign from employment to the requirements to mandatorily report to us. So we currently have, I should have started there, currently have a mandatory reporting system for certain crimes. You have to report them to the board. We are now adding if you resign and you committed one, or you're put on administrative leave and you've committed a violation. And if you work for a registry, the registries now would need to report. So we put that into a legislative proposal. You approved it. It has been submitted. It was very early in advance when we presented it to you, but it is now presented, and hopefully we can find an author, and that is the status.
Oh, thank you. Okay, next is,
Item 7C is just an update. Internally, we refer to these as the AB 2138 regulations. I'm going to say you probably recall, but it was very, there was legislation, AB 2138, that passed last year that requires regulatory changes to be effective, or that become effective. Hold on, let me add. The legislation has an implementation date of 7/1/2020, and so each of the boards needs to move forward with promulgating regulations in line with that, and it has to do with substantial relationship criteria, rehabilitation, and so forth. We have that in a proposed regulatory package, among other things, disciplinary guidelines, some other cleanup language, if you will. This kind of just highlights what Stephanie mentioned earlier about the lengthy regulation process, and we are not even in the official process yet. This is just to give you an update of the information. The packet has been submitted since the June 7th meeting, which was the last time you saw this language, has been submitted to DCA, the regulations coordinator, and it's there's several layers of review within the department, and what we had last heard as of the agenda mailing was that it was still in the budget office, but I will tell you that just this week I followed up and was advised that the package is with chief counsel in the legal office. So once it gets signed off there, it will go to the director's office and then on to agency. And once we have agency sign off, we will actually move forward with the formal process of noticing the regulation and processing through that rulemaking process.
any questions from the board? Okay. Okay, next is 7D on dealing with continuing education. Would you
Sure.
care to
Do you want to?
take it on?
Okay, so 7D. This is language that was approved by the board back in March to begin pursuing regulations. It caught me off guard because I didn't think we were at that position yet, that place yet. And I'm not sure the format. I know that these have to get approved at meetings before we begin the language, because OAL will go back and say, did your board even approve starting this process? And I was a little concerned that it wasn't in the right format, but more importantly, I had a staff member come up to me with a great, something she noticed about a change that was needed. And then Mark and Ricardo and I were meeting on the clinical requirements. And as you see in the cover letter there, we looked at a lot of different things. And one of the best things that we came up with was to not require people to meet certain requirements to become a preceptor, but to actually offer continuing education if they moved in that direction as a huge incentive for them to be preceptors. And I think the whole overall reaching goal here was to, one, it provides leadership when people step up to take the class to be a preceptor. And then if they actually provide doing the preceptorship, we're getting better candidates out of these schools and better employees. And I will tell you, I actually shared this with the executive office that we were looking at doing this, and they thought, oh my gosh, that's a great idea. So this is affecting not just our respiratory therapists, this is affecting kind of a lot of health professions trying to find really qualified people willing to give up and sacrifice their time to teach somebody. Well, now they have an incentive to do it. So we modified the CE to include this idea, hoping that the board would approve it and move to accept this language to move forward with and begin the rulemaking process.
Any questions from the board? Okay, shall we?
There should be a formal motion.
Yeah, I was going to have questions and make a. have
I
a
move to
motion
approve.
made.
Can we, there's, on the cover of this, there's a motion, like it's written out. If somebody, whoever makes the motion can read that under item 2 in the blue area.
Sure.
Okay, got to do that, Ricardo?
So I move to approve, I move for the president to, the one in the blue, right?
Yeah, move for the board
Second.
staff.
President calls the agenda item, and it is presented by or as directed by the president. President,
It's just action item number 2. Just read that language there.
oh, I'm sorry. I move for the board staff to pursue the promulgation of regulatory amendment as outlined in the attached proposed regulatory text and authorize board staff to make non-substantive changes as necessary.
Second. Is that a motion, right?
Yes.
Any-
Second.
uh,
Is there any further board member discussion?
Beg your pardon?
Pointing out the actual changes. I should have done that probably in the opening, but let me go ahead and point those out real quick. On page 3, the crux of this is that, do I need the new language? Okay, I got it. That for every 1,000 hours that somebody provides preceptorship to a student, they earn 5 CE hours, and that goes up every 1,000. So if they do 2,000, they get 10 hours. If they do 3,000, they get 15 hours. And not only is it 15 hours of CE, it also counts as live CE and leadership CE. So remember we had the concerns about the live CE before?
Yes.
This is another avenue they can go, which is still greatly benefits the public in getting really qualified students. So.
Elaine?
Thank you, Mr. President. So I have a quick question. So as I was reading it, A5, it says not have any prior or existing personal relationship with the students precepted. So just for clarification, let's say a preceptor has, I don't know, daughter or son going through the training or school. So then if that person is in that class or in that group, then the preceptor will not be able to meet the criteria. Is that?
That would be correct, but it also means that it's not that they can't precept them, it's that they can't take credit for it. Just in this context. We're not limiting them from providing preceptorship, although I think that's discouraged anyway, but they wouldn't get credit for it as far as for continuing education.
And this only applies in clinic.
Right, and I got that, but I'm just, because most of the time, as we know, that there is a group of students, not just one individual. So I feel like then they're still giving the education to the group, but then they're not getting the credit because of that one individual. Can we modify that maybe and just to clarify?
I didn't get the impression that's how clinical education was done. I didn't know it was a group. I got the impression it was 1 or 2 students at a time.
No, it could be up to 6 per cohort regulation, because that's the ratio.
Yeah, I think she's referring to, CORC has a ratio of 1 to 6. So one clinical preceptor could potentially have 6 students. You're right. I mean, that hardly ever happens. I mean, at least not in my experience.
I have precepted for 4 or 5 students in a group. I just feel like that if that can be modified, that there cannot be any one-on-one really, or one-on-one training, and that will not qualify. Because then if that one student is in that group, then the preceptor doesn't get credit for any of the hours. And they go in clinics for months in some programs.
And maybe that's not, when you drafted this in mind, you had drafted it like if they were giving preceptor to 2 or 3 people, they're getting credit for each student with one instruction? Or did you take it as, do you know what I'm saying? Because it depends on how, and maybe this needs to also be clarified. And I took this to mean you can do 2 students at once and take credit for both of them. But if that's not the case, then that would be a concern.
Yes, because this number 5 is actually a criteria that they will have to fulfill. And if there's one student that has a prior existing relationship with the preceptor, then they don't meet the criteria. Therefore, they cannot claim for any of the hours. So that's just my concern. Maybe we can modify that language in a way so it's clear that you can still have a group of students if he has, as long as it's not a one-on-one direct training. Thank you.
We may have to,
Good point.
we may have to clarify and possibly limit the hours in a 24-hour period. Because you're right, if a preceptor has 4 students, they're gonna want to claim clinical hours for each, for all 4 students on the same day. And that might be a problem.
Okay, is the board okay with us taking this back and reworking it a bit and bringing it back to the next board meeting? Are you okay with that?
I believe so. Should we table the motion?
Is that the only change that the board wants with regard to the regulatory language? Are there any other changes?
I think that's it.
That's it?
I'm a
And
little
it's just the
confused on this.
concern about having the one-to-one supervision? Is that what essentially?
Yes. It's
Well, there's 2
there's
issues.
also a second part with the
Yeah.
hours of claiming multiple hours
Right.
for multiple students.
I see. Okay.
In other words, as a group, do you get one set of hours as a group, or do you get one set of hours per each student?
Yeah.
That needs to be clarified.
So it seems to me that if you're instructing a group, whether it's 1 person or 5, you should only get the same hours,
Right.
however many hours. Does that, everyone agree with that?
Yes, for that day, for that shift.
Right.
But is this, I don't think that this is specific enough to interpret that.
Okay, yeah, it is actually written that way, is it not?
Is it?
Under subdivision BD, or B2D, on page 3, the very, very bottom, last sentence. Because it says that shall retain records that clearly indicate the students supervised. The hours precepted on each date, et cetera.
Right, so as a preceptor, let's say today I have 3 students, and I'm thinking, oh, I get to claim CE credit hours for each student that I have, not just as a group.
Yeah, I think we have to go back and work this again. I don't know if the board's okay with that, or do they, see, the problem is if we move forward with the regulations without the change, the regulation process could take 9 to even 18 months. So that would put this change off for a really long time. Are you okay with us coming back in our next board meeting with other language?
Yes.
I think the board should make a motion then.
I have a question. Is there any way that the changes be made and distributed to the board, and then the board be called for a conference call or whatever to then just vote on the proposed language?
We can do a teleconference, but again, that requires you going to a public location. It's like having, it's a board meeting. It has to be noticed and that kind of thing. Usually we have the committee work on it, but clearly there was some oversight on this one. You know, we could change it to where I'm working, if Mark's okay with it. Are you okay with maybe Ricardo and Charlene working on this with me? Because since Charlene raised the other issues, or?
I have no problem with
So I think that might cover the,
I mean, we've seen the basic language, and we
Right.
know what the questionable part of the language is, and if it's clarified, and then I just don't want to put it off too much longer.
yeah. So do you want to have a teleconference then? Do you want to have a January, mid to late January teleconference?
And the purpose would be to present the changes and then approve it.
Yeah. And any other board business that might come up since we're there.
I'll make the
I'm
motion.
okay with that.
I think.
I'll make a motion to table this topic until our next teleconference meeting in January 2020.
I second.
Okay, any discussion? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
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 I'm sorry, who was the second on that?
Mark.
Okay.
Was it Ricardo or Mark?
It was me.
Oh, sorry.
I sound like one.
So, any opposed to a teleconference in January? Early January to clear this matter up? Okay. Motion pass. Thank you. Okay. Any public comment on this proposed change on the Cs? Okay, the next is number 8, election of officers for 2020. I'd like to make a nomination for Ricardo Guzman to run for president. Are there any other nominations?
I nominate Mark for vice president.
There a second?
So
Are there any seconds on?
Which one are you second? Yeah, seconding.
Can you second both nominations? Are there any other nominations? That's more important. Okay. I don't hear any other nominations, so second is, thank you for the second.
Do we vote?
Roll call one at a time?
Yep, so,
Okay, for president, this one is for president, for Ricardo Guzman as president. Mary Ellen Early? Aye. Rebecca Franzoya?
aye.
President Goldstein?
aye.
Mike Hardeman?
Aye.
Sam Kabushan?
Aye.
Ricardo Guzman?
Aye.
And Charlene Bose? Now we will do vice president. Mark Goldstein be nominated as vice president. Mary Ellen Early?
Aye.
Rebecca Franzoya,
Aye.
Mark Goldstein,
Aye.
Mike Hardiman,
Aye.
Sam Kabusha,
Aye.
Ricardo Guzman,
Aye.
and Charlene Bose.
Aye.
Vote unanimous.
You're swift, or you just got it.
Okay. Okay. So, congratulations.
I probably have one. I'm just, I'm panicked.
We have a calendar of 2020 dates.
Okay, we want to start with January, since we're going to add a teleconference meeting there. It shouldn't be more than probably an hour, if that. Can we go with either the 17th? Oh, but that's on a 3-day weekend. I don't know if you have plans. Let's try the 24th or the 31st.
I like the 24th.
Does the 24th work for everybody? Teleconference? Okay. Okay, let me move over to the March meetings. We're suggesting March 20th, 27th, April 3rd, or April 10th. Does anyone want to throw out a date that works good?
Well, March 20th does not work for me.
Okay,
I'm afraid on both those dates I'll be out of the country.
so you want to look at April 3rd or April 10th?
Um,
I see April 10th is Good Friday.
Yes.
so-
So we want to try April 10th?
Or April 3rd.
Third.
3rd? How is April 3rd for everybody?
Okay.
Good, good. Shirley? Okay. Moving on to June. June is always a tentative meeting, and it may be teleconference, it may be in person, but we have some dates set up here. Are any of those dates that do not work for anyone? You got student graduations, lots of vacations happen that time. Anybody have any dates that don't work for them?
I prefer later in the month.
Okay, 19 or 26?
Yeah, either one of those work for me.
19th's better for me.
Okay.
What day?
19th, is it?
I need 2 here. Great, so June 19th will be the tentative meeting, and then we go back down to the end of the year. We have October 23rd, the 30th, and November 6th. Any of those dates do not work for anybody.
So 23rd is good.
Does work for you. October 23rd does work. Okay, does October 23rd work for everybody?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so just to recap, we have January 24th teleconference, April 3rd board meeting, and that one will be in Southern California. June 19th, which is tentative, could be any format, and October 23rd here in Sacramento. All right.
Okay. That sounds like we've got the dates for next year. Okay. Next is public comment on items not on the agenda. So we have some folks out. Any comments out there? Anything you'd like to say?
Thank you for being here.
Okay. Future agenda items. Any comments from the board or the public?
I would just add maybe a sunset review, because that report's due next year, and I'm going to be working with the executive committee on that, so we may put that on the agenda just to bring it to everyone's attention.
Okay. A good point. Well, it seems like it's before we go into closed session, might be time for a bio break. And let's see, it's reconvene at 11:10. Does that work? No, but we'll
Closed.
reconvene as a closed session.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay.